Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar Business Flows. My name is Russell Gomersall. I'm a partner at Business Process Experts. And in the next half an hour, I would like to present you our business transformation framework, Business Flows, and how you can boost your transformation capabilities. I've muted the participants. If you have questions, please just enter them into the chat, and my assistant Katharina will be collecting the questions, and then at the end I'll be able to answer them. Okay, just a short introduction to our company. Business Process Experts is a company we founded ourselves 2012 as a spin-off of IdeaShare Consulting. So during our consulting time, we gathered a lot of experience with a long history in ERP implementations and business process management projects. So always in the context of big transformation initiatives, how to best apply methodologies. Currently, we are 25 full-time employees, and we see ourselves on the one hand as business architects, so really supporting our customers in designing and setting up their process and IT architectures, translating business requirements into solutions. On the other hand, also as a business coach, deriving operating models from strategy, and then designing integrated business scenarios, establishing end-to-end thinking. Now, our mission we see, and this is one thing about consulting companies, we think it's really important that during the initiatives that we engage in, that we, in parallel, actually enable the customer to become more and more independent. So it's not just a matter of doing the work for the customer, but always bringing in new ideas, methodologies, and then actually over the course of the time, building up the capabilities within the customer so he can actually then follow up and do the things better and more independently by himself. So to set the stage, just to set the stage on what do actually X-Men have in common with your business transformation team. That's something I always thought about when I talk to customers and I encounter them with their teams. And I always saw this situation. I always thought it was quite comical that there seems to be quite a lot of analogies between the customer situation and what you encounter when you watch one of these X-Men films. And the answer is that typically the business transformation teams we meet, they really have a high level of skill. So they really all have their superpowers. But they all have different skills. They have a different background, and they also have a different interest. And in these X-Men films, I always realize that it takes half the film till they actually agree upon the common target. So it always kind of like a stage with a lot of issues and topics and what is really important, what is not important, until they really kind of like join up as a team. And then the target is really big. It's typically something like to save the world. And the transformation teams we encounter, customers, they also have a humongous job in front of them. And it really is, on the bottom line, a ginormous task for them actually to manage. And with all their different skills, it really wouldn't work if they didn't have a manager who really kind of like kept this team together, implemented a common approach, set the common target for them to work for and move forward. Now, typical in these X-Men films as well is that after the 90 minutes, they kind of like save the world, but then they realize, or you realize actually when you see the end of the film, this is not really the end. This is just the beginning. It's a sequel. So one thing, again, we realize is that a lot of companies enter a business transformation project, but then they realize, this project is going to take a long time, and we have a lot of projects in parallel, and to be honest, it's never going to end. It is going to be, we're going to finish one project, and the next project is going to start. And I think, which is also quite interesting, X-Men have actually been around since 1963, and there are still new films being done with the same kind of like superpowers and super people. And I think with business transformation as well, it's nothing new. It's something that has been around since the beginning of companies, but it's also constantly evolving, and companies are continuously in a state of business transformation. And from this kind of like context, I always encounter in the companies, or we encounter in the companies, that they already have a lot of initiatives running. So they have Lean Six Sigma initiatives, maybe on a production level. They have continuous improvement processes in place, like Kaizen. They have some process management topics where they talk about process lifecycle management. So they think about different implementation methodologies or transformation methodologies like waterfall and agile. So you never really kind of like have a real greenfield. You always have a lot of kind of like single initiatives, and each has their own kind of like, let's say, superpowers and their history with which they actually kind of like cover a topic in their perspective on the business transformation. And what we say is that in total this is correct. And with business flows as a framework, we really want to manage the business transformation capabilities within the company. So we bring a set of content and methodologies to kind of like bring all these superpowers together and set them in context for the overall enterprise to be better in the way they actually go about transformation. Now, talking about business transformation capabilities, which are they to be concrete? So typically, you'll see here these 6 key capabilities, and they all evolve around similar topics that you know from other approaches. And what we see is really important is that you have to establish a basic or a general strategic capability in your organization to be able to develop business strategies and innovate on products and services. And to be able to actually kind of like set them free, to actually initiate the transformation, you have to have the capability of really setting proper mandates and identifying accountable transformation owners who will then drive the transformation initiative. Second key capability is the planning capability. So it's a lot of companies have very good strategies, and they have a lot of innovation and power on defining products, but they really lack in actually kind of like bringing it down to the street, bringing it into the organization. And a lot of the time that really kind of like because they have the problem of actually kind of like taking this strategy and making it operational. So with that, we mean that the planning capability really needs to involve the operating models. So actually deriving operating models from the strategy, and from there identify the transformation requirements. What has to change so that we can actually make this strategy work? And with that, you need to set the business-driven objectives and priorities. So you definitely will find different transformation requirements. You will have maybe different initiatives running. And only if you really link the strategy and the business drivers involved in this to the objectives, and then take decisions on the priorities, you will have a clear roadmap on where to start or what has to be done with the highest priority. And what you always have to do as well is, and this is also a planning capability that you have to establish, you have to distinguish the scope very clearly to make sure that the people and within their interdependency communicate properly, but also do not actually disrupt each other with their activities. So from the planning capability then, we think as third is really important to establish a proper design capability. So here, deriving design criteria, design guidelines for the overall solution and that you want to evolve to from the values. So taking the strategy and the business drivers, taking that a level down and actually deriving. So if I set up a new process or I set up a new organization, what is actually the value that it is bringing? What are the aspects that I have to take into consideration during the design? And we also see here that a lot of transformations are very technological centric, and here we think the process-centric approach for the design is critical. Holistic design, with that we mean that the capability of not just looking at the process itself from an organizational perspective, from the role perspective, but also from the IT perspective, and also taking into consideration the measurement points for KPIs, and in this holistic design also already taking a look at, say, things like controls, risks, etc. So having a holistic design on the base, which you can actually then go into the transformation itself. Now, with all these new ideas popping up and all these designs being handled in transformations, we also see, and this is the fourth capability, the governance capability, is really maintaining transparency and traceability on the business architecture. So what we encountering in customers that they will engage in a business transformation, they will start drafting their new to-be, but then they lose track on all the complexity. They do not manage the complexity properly. They do not distinguish between what has already been implemented and what is the to-be design. They do not actually distinguish between the variants that pop up during over time, where they have to distinguish also between local variants and standard templates. So here, building up a governance capability that at any time you can answer the question, what has been implemented where? So how far has the transformation already happened? And where do you still have kind of like designs to be designed that still have to be implemented and they're still being adjusted? And at which stage is something that you really need to establish in your organization, or else each of these initiatives will at a certain time start counteracting each other and not working together. Fifth capability, and this is something that a lot of people focus on, is the actual implementation capability itself. And here we don't see that it is, say, kind of like one approach that has to be established, say, like everything has to go under the methodology of Agile, or everything has to follow Lean Six Sigma. Here we think it is really important that by setting the proper scope, that within this transformation initiative that has a clear scope, that there you apply the suitable approach. So this could be for very strong organizational change, where a lot of skills and roles are changing. It can be completely different to where a new technology is being developed, where Agile definitely makes sense, in comparison to maybe the introduction of a very highly standardized product that you're rolling out, where maybe a classical waterfall approach may make most sense. And again, another capability within the implementation really has, where a lot of companies lack, is actually really embedding the change management and the establishing of the business readiness. With that saying, we believe that typically for a lot of transformations, people focus on the technology. And I think actually a lot of the times you can spend 20% of your time establishing 80% of the basic functionality, but you need 80% of the time to actually really get the business to understand all the exceptions, the business rules, the policies that you want to evolve around this solution. So implementing the standard is good, you do the training, everything works, but the real fallbacks come when you have deviations, exceptions, etc. And this is the business readiness, and this is the capability a lot of companies are lacking, really need to establish. And last but not least, to close the loop, is establishing monitoring, controlling capabilities, so that actually after the implementation or during the implementation already, you maintain the transparency and traceability on the business performance. Are you achieving the objectives? And then from there, actually establishing a proper business ownership for the performance, which with that I mean actually that you have the business always reflecting on their own performance, setting themselves new goals, and actually initiating new micro changes, optimizations within their organization, within their processes, and thus actually feeding back to the strategy and to starting off new initiatives. So these are the 6 business transformation capabilities we believe a company has to set up and establish. And the business flows framework we look at actually doesn't really so much cover the strategic capability, but where business flows really started from the planning capability onwards. So actually our typical job is to kind of like take up the strategies that have been developed and where the, say, the baseline for the transformation has been set, and then from there driving down operating models and getting them, getting the organization transforming to actually build up these required business capabilities. So how do we go about this? How would you actually, when you want to apply business flows, and what is actually concretely behind this business flows framework that you would establish? So typically what we do is that within, let's say a major business transformation, we engage, and then along, say, kind of like the typical planning and implementation cycle of a big business transformation, we bring in business flows as a framework and thus boost the transformation as it is, but then also kind of like implement these capabilities within the organization. Typically, this takes place across 5 main steps. One of them is during the business architecture and ownership, during when that is set up. Second one is the business drivers and operating models. We have kind of like modules there. Third step is then during the value drivers and the to-be design. Fourth is the actual business transformation. And last but not least is performance controls and optimization. So that all these actually work together in a kind of like a stringent methodology. You also have to establish the governance, but this is also part of the actual the kickoff. So within the business architecture and ownership, what do we actually bring to the party? What are the accelerators that we bring? And first of all, what we bring and that's where customers a lot of the times waste a lot of time from our perspective, is we bring a complete process reference model, which in setting up the actual business architecture can be used to actually set up the enterprise business map. Based on this, this is suitable for all industrial customers. It has a complete architecture, so there's nothing you really have to think about. It's best practice. It's been used in several large, mid-sized transformation initiatives. So the idea is here that you set up your enterprise business map. You use this for actually defining ownerships within your organization. And you use this to actually then set the scope of the initiatives that you want to trigger. And also during this ownership discussion, what we bring with the party is typical different scenarios for how to actually set up your ownership of the transformation of the enterprise map, the business architecture, typical criteria on which to decide how actually to establish this ownership, and also typical maturity assessments to actually start a discussion on how to move forward on establishing ownership for these transformation topics within the organization. Now, when that is set up, then the next stage is that it is important to, from the strategy, actually define actually the priorities with which to actually move forward and derive the business transformation initiative. So here, what we bring to the party are typical process maturity and heat map assessments. We can create, based on our best practices, typical heat maps on where to actually focus in the context of the transformation, and also typical benchmarks and KPIs with which to actually set the objectives for the initiative. And which is even more important, based on our reference model, then to derive the operating models. And with operating models, what we understand is that we have a set of best practice industrial end-to-end scenarios, which cover typically how within certain domains you create a certain value. So there are typical value chains with which what kind of processes are required. Behind the processes are the business capabilities that are then established in functions. So based on these end-to-end scenarios, we can actually trigger a discussion on the scope and reflect the objectives of the transformation against best practice operating models and business scenarios, and from there adjust where applicable to set the actual overall scope and objective and content of the transformation. So here we have a complete set, not just you saw it on the other slide, for each domain of best practice end-to-end scenarios, and these can be used for actually deriving the operating models and defining the business cases and linking the business objectives, we call them business drivers, to the actual initiative. This then set, with this then set, we then actually link up the business drivers to the actual value drivers. So this is the guidelines we actually derive, where we actually, coming from the overall objectives of the initiative, then actually say, okay, what actually has this process and this scenario got to achieve to be able to achieve the overall objective. And with that, then we reflect again against the reference content of standard processes, where no organization has to kind of like in detail develop these processes from scratch. They have to reflect their requirements against standard processes and adjust where required on how to actually implement this. So a lot of our initiatives around the core process areas are then IT-wise implemented in SAP. Typically, in the context of the design, you want to define KPIs, risks, and controls. These are all things where in our best practice processes that we bring to the party, we do not have to discuss anything about nomenclature, about typical standard and best practice processes. This is something we bring along. What is more important is that these are adjusted according to the scope and the objective, the value drivers that you want to achieve. So here you take the decisions on how far you want to automate, what kind of KPIs you want to take to be able to measure the objectives that you want to fulfill, and you feed this all then into the overall design. And this is then also the baseline then that you take into the actual business transformation. In business transformation, we have, there's a lot of different methodologies. I'm sure we do not cover every methodology the same way a lot of other companies do, where we do have a focus on classical waterfall methodologies, which typically are already established to customers. What is quite new and getting more and more established are agile implementation approaches. Here we bring for our content a complete product backlog and a methodology on how to actually link the processes and the business drivers down to the actual agile implementation approach. And we bring a business readiness approach, so how actually in parallel to actually the typical technical implementation, how to cover the topic of business readiness, how to identify the major change areas, how to actually educate people on processes. So next to just an IT training, how to actually get the people for the awareness of why they are changing, what the new changes are, what the actual new objectives are, what the new interfaces are, what the new roles are, to help them actually transform here, independent from the classical just communicating and training. And concerning the actual identified fits and requirements concerning changes within the organization and the roles, here we work together with a partner. It's called Hill International, which have they call it best fit competence analysis, which is a very sophisticated, been developed over 30 years tool for actually identifying your potentials within your organization, and also deriving then like a talent management tool for deriving the right kind of like training requirements and possibilities of developing your staff in the direction of what you actually need. So last but not least, on the topic of performance controls and optimization, we have a lot of kind of like starter packages for implementing risk management and in internal control systems. Here again, we have own maturity models and roadmap on how to actually implement this in parallel to the actual normal transformation. And we have a set of frameworks for performance monitoring tools. Here we apply a lot of, say, from our history of tools around the industrial stack of SAP Solution Manager or the RS PPM to actually then kind of like put measurement points as designed into the system, and from there set up and establish an organizational kind of like performance monitoring capability for these companies then to actually measure their process to see if the transformation was successful, to see where they need to adopt and adjust their organization, their processes, maybe even their skills, and do some retrainings, and then feedback to the actual beginning of the loop. So that was just a real fast forward walkthrough of actually what we have within our stack and how along a business transformation initiative we actually within our framework bring elements of content and methodologies in which then when we go are established at the customer best case and actually then boost the transformation capabilities all for future initiatives. So, to summarize, actually, and coming back to this initial picture, what is actually, we essentially want to help this guy to manage and enable his team. So we have a lot of pictures of other superhero films, but I like this one best because actually these teams of very different superhuman powers are actually managed by an old guy. And that's actually, we see our job in helping this guy manage his, let's say, chaotic but very super powerful team. And we ourselves don't really have superpowers, but we have a super framework based on our experience. So what we really have tried to do over the years is after each project, we kind of like sit down, do a lessons learned, and try to further develop actually this framework. And we also offer this to our customers to actually kind of like take on this. So it's nothing like a black box where we say, come in, we'll do some consulting, and then you could get to see what we actually can do with it. But we really try to be very transparent on what we actually have within our framework. And we believe that, say, applying this framework then in the context of the business transformation initiative will really boost your transformation capabilities, not just help you be successful with your actual transformation. And that is, say, the main point where we want to differentiate ourselves from other consulting companies. Okay, so from my side, I'm not sure if there's any questions. I'm glad to hear any. And of course, if you have any questions later on, I think we're going to place this webinar online. We'll send you a link for the recording, and you have my contact data. So if you want to have any kind of like questions or any walkthroughs in detail on some of these elements, then I'm glad to set up a private WebEx session or get in contact with you, or even meet up with you, where we can show you maybe some specific use cases on the initiatives that we've been involved in. Okay. So, Katharina, do you have any questions?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Russell, for the presentation. My name is Katharina. I work in marketing at BP Experts, and I have so far received one question that I would like to hand over to you, and this is the framework only available in conjunction with consulting?
Although we typically with most of our customers, we are in a consulting relationship. We do also have a set of customers that actually just buy certain parts of the framework. A main aspect here is the actual content that we have, the repository, the enterprise business process repository that we have, where customers, on the one hand, for their initiatives want to boost the startup and of setting up a repository, and they actually then buy the content. And here we have a couple of customers that just wanted the content. Some of them just wanted to have a read access, to have it as a reference library with which they could work. And so we have let's say, a handful of customers that more or less were just or are just interested in the actual content. So here we're definitely open to show more in detail what we have here. And I think it always depends on certain methodologies and approach. It doesn't really make sense to sell them without any consulting. The starter packages we have here, we have bundled certain, let's say, products, which then with a couple of days, let's say, training and a couple of workshops, we establish them without being engaged in a big project. So this, for example, is around the Agile Iris. Here we have a starter package where with something like 5 days consulting, the methodology is let's say, handed over and trained. And around risk management, we have a starter package where here, I think with something like 6 workshops, the scope is set, the basic framework is set, and then from there on, the customer can act without any extensive consulting from our side. So I'd say these are also products where no real kind of classical consulting involvement from us is required. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much. For now, I don't have any other questions, but as already mentioned, if there are any questions later, please don't hesitate to contact us, and we will be pleased to answer them following the webinar. So I think we can close for today. I thank you all for joining, and Russell again for the presentation, of course. Wish you all a very good day, and I hope to have you again in our next webinar. Thank you, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.